Hey, welcome to the Say What podcast with just the two of us today. I'm Mason, one of the leaders at Brook Lake, along with our lead pastor, Scott. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you all? Good to be with you. Thanks for tuning in and engaging and watching this. Can't wait to have this conversation.
Totally. So we are 3 weeks into. Yesterday, you preached part 3 of a series called Chosen. Yesterday, your message was titled "To Forgive," and we talked all about the basic principle, but not easy principle by any means, of forgiving. It's foundational to our faith to be people who forgive one another.
Right.
But man, that's hard, and it's not always as straightforward as we want it to be. Like as you were preaching yesterday, I was just thinking, in order to forgive somebody, um, some kind of offense has happened, some kind of sin has probably happened, which always
Yep.
gets messy. And so forgiveness is not straightforward because the thing that needs to be forgiven has a way of already having muddied the waters and making a mess of things one way or the other, right? So man, like I was just really thankful yesterday that you jumped into that. Forgiveness is something we can talk about all the time, and there's just
Yeah.
more and more layers to talk about because every situation is so different. So I
Yeah.
think today's conversation is going to be really helpful for a lot of people because all of us have people in our lives that we've had to forgive. All of us have needed to be forgiven, and many of us have people that we haven't forgiven yet, and we don't know how to. We don't know how to like engage with that or circle back to that thing or
Right.
allow ourselves to feel that thing emotionally. So anyway, I'm excited to have a follow-up conversation about forgiveness, get into it a little bit. And I'm glad that you guys are joining. Before we start, hit subscribe if you haven't already. You want to be notified whenever we're posting content. We're posting stuff all the time, whether it's follow-up conversations to a sermon or the sermon itself or announcements for our church family or whatever. So
Yeah.
definitely subscribe and let us know that you're here. Engage in the comments. Okay, I'm going
Yeah.
to read the passage that you preached from yesterday, and then I'll pass it to you, not to give us a recap because people can go watch yesterday's message, but more or less kind of a brief flyover of kind of what you hit yesterday. In fact, some of the bullet points that you preached from yesterday, I'll bring them back up, so you don't necessarily have to hit all those,
Sure.
whatever you're feeling. But the passage you preached from yesterday was Genesis 45, verses 1 through 15. Did you read in the CSB yesterday?
I did not. I read in the NLT, although I am officially migrating to the CSB for future. I've been reading it devotionally.
Okay.
And I really like it right now. So this Sunday, I'm going to be preaching from it.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
First time preaching from it, like full on.
I've used it before, but like I said, I've been reading it personally and trying to make the decision. This is a whole nother conversation, but in
Yeah.
a nutshell, yeah, I've been kind of wondering, should I switch because most of the time I'll lean towards the NLT just because it's so readable, and
Yeah.
it's a great translation for
Yeah.
sure. But yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm reading out of the NIV, which is the non-inspired version if you're not a follower of Jesus. So
Ooh,
I'm just
took
teasing.
a
Have you,
shot.
have you heard of non-inspired version? ESV is the extra saved version.
I've heard nearly inspired versions for the NIV.
I like that. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
Anyway, I'm reading from the NIV, which is what my Bible is. So
yeah,
there's bound to be a couple words that are translated a little different, but more or less,
yeah.
this is exactly what you read yesterday. So then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one that you sold into Egypt. And now, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you, and now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land. And for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children, and your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded to me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin, and he wept. Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. What just happened? Hey, here we are. We had connection issues. Pastor Scott's in a new spot. The question I was asking you, we just read Genesis 45, 1 through 15. What did we just read? What's that about? Give us the quick flyover of what you talked about yesterday.
Yeah, so Joseph's story is just has been a part of my life journey for so long, because Joseph had these dreams when he was a boy that, first of all, Joseph was his daddy's favorite. He got this gift given to him from his father. It was the coat of many colors, and very expensive, would have been very expensive gift. And brothers were very jealous of that bond that he had with his dad, and dad's favoritism towards him, as we all can imagine. But anyway, he had these dreams, and as a really, really young person, and even just starting out in the ministry, I'm of the era where you just get a dream for God, and you just stick to that dream and put your head down and go for it. And obviously we need to have vision. We need to be full of hope, optimism for the future, for sure. That's highly motivational. But anyway, my experience has been one of just a roller coaster ride, ups and downs in life, in ministry, in the school of hard knocks. And so I've resonated with Joseph's story, that he had these dreams, and it was God gave him this dream that his brothers would bow down to him. He told this dream to his brothers. They get jealous. They get upset, as we all would, if our brother came to us and said, "Hey, you're going to bow down to me." And a series of events starts unfolding. They decide to kill him. One of the brothers says, "No, we're not going to kill him. Let's sell him into slavery." So they sold him. He goes, he's a slave. He gets framed for rape. He goes to prison. And all the while, he's just holding on to this dream. And it's just such a profound thing. So without going into every little detail, he finds himself in the palace, in Pharaoh's palace, because he has the gift of interpreting dreams. He interpreted a couple dreams successfully. Pharaoh heard about it. Pharaoh called for him. He interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. And long and short of it is, Pharaoh said, "I'm going to put you in charge of everything." And the dreams that Pharaoh had that Joseph interpreted were that there would be years of prosperity followed by years of famine. And so Joseph's task was to prepare for the years of famine. And that's exactly what he did. And his brothers, we find ourselves in the passage you read. This is a multi-chapter story from Genesis 37 all the way through the end of Genesis, chapter all the way through chapter 50. And he finds himself, his brothers come to Egypt to try to get provision because they were starving. Their nation was starving. And they found himself in front of Joseph. And Joseph miraculously, supernaturally forgives them. He obviously had already forgiven them in his heart, right? And so he has this encounter with them for the first time. And yeah, that's the flyover version of the story. It's just a powerful story of forgiveness. Don't let me forget, Mason, like towards the end of this conversation, I want to fast forward all the way to the end of the story itself in Genesis. There is this great line and then a resource that I've recommended before, but I really want to recommend to people that are really struggling with forgiving somebody or people. So let's come back to that.
You got it. Okay, with that, I'm just going to lob some questions your way that were sent in, questions that I had watching yesterday as well, based on your actual sermon yesterday and some of the points that you gave. So I'm just going to I've ordered them so that we kind of re-walk through some of the stuff you said yesterday in order. One of the first things that you said is one of the myths of forgiveness is that I'm required to forgive only those who ask for forgiveness. And your point there was we're actually called to forgive anyone who needs our forgiving, whether they've asked for it or not.
That's
just a
right.
Practicality question. If that person is somewhat removed from our life, or that scenario happened a long time ago and they never asked for forgiveness, maybe they're convinced they're not even in the wrong.
Right.
Is it always appropriate to, let me ask it this way. Can I forgive in my own heart? Or am I required to have a conversation with that person? Is there a rule about that, or does that kind of depend on the scenario? And then is it always helpful to go back to that person and say, I know you don't think you're in the wrong, but I've been carrying this. I feel like you were wrong and I forgive you. When someone hasn't even asked for forgiveness, like how does that work practically?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of people confuse forgiveness and reconciliation, and they're related. They're like cousins, but they're not the same thing. And one can absolutely forgive another without being reconciled in relationship to that person. And so forgiveness is always within our control. Reconciliation is not. Reconciliation requires at least two parties, right? And so, yes, if in the scenario you kind of painted out, the moment we are sinned against, we are wronged, we are offended, whatever, we are instructed, commanded to forgive, to release that person, and to release the bitterness from taking root in our own heart, because we've all seen this in our lives, and we've certainly known people that grow to be bitter, grumpy, just really unkind and unpleasant people in their older age. But we've also known the opposite to be true. People that are sweet, kind, gentle, and I'm convinced there's only one difference between the two. One is that people have decided, I'm going to walk through life releasing the bitterness from taking root in my own heart. And the only way to do that is to forgive others.
Wow.
Or I'm going to hold on to everything, and I'm going to, and it just ends up, we've heard, it's all cliche, but but it's so true. Yeah. It ends up just eroding from the inside, and ultimately it comes out in the way we live life and the way we treat people. So, yeah.
I'm over here taking notes. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. That's really good. Because I have always thought of those things as the same thing, and that limits my ability to forgive if the other person does not respond, right? Like I feel like I haven't forgiven them at that point, when in reality that's my inability to let go.
Yeah. So, you had asked the question, when we forgive, do we go to that person and say, hey, you didn't ask for it, but I forgave you? And I would say we need to be super careful about that, because that can kind of be used as a tool. Maybe you got to really check your heart. I would say really be sensitive to the Spirit, really pray about that. Don't be quick to rush into that kind of conversation, because it potentially could do more harm than good.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that's just our effort to kind of rub salt in a wound.
Yeah.
And so just really, really be prayerful about that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. My second kind of myth about forgiveness that you gave yesterday was that forgiveness erases all memory or trauma. Um, and your point was that that's not necessarily true. Like, we can forgive, and that doesn't mean that we've healed from that trauma right away. So my question is, again, how do we do that in a healthy way? So, for example, if my wife and I are in an argument and I forgive her, but I'm still hurt, and I come back later, let's flip it, because usually it works the other way around. I've hurt her. Like, this is going on YouTube. I've hurt her, and um, she has made me aware of that, and I've apologized, and she's forgiven me. And later on, she circles back and says, like, "Hey, can we talk through that again, or can we?" I'm still working. This is a minor issue. People have gone through big things that last years, and they're still processing. They're still healing. But the temptation for when my wife comes back to me, is to say, you already forgave me. Like, we're already past this. So how do you, I know there's a big question and we don't have time for a long answer, but I guess my question is, how do we give people room? The language you just gave me is helpful for this, but I guess, how do we give people room to forgive us up front, but give them time to process and to reconcile? How do we allow forgiveness to happen like that and reconciliation to take time without it feeling like, I thought I already forgave you, or you already forgave me? Why are we dragging this thing on? Right. I guess I'm thinking of those people who listened yesterday or who are listening right now that feel like, I forgave that person for that thing 10 years ago, but if I'm honest, it still haunts me every day. So how do I really feel like I forgave them, but what do I do now?
Yeah.
You know,
I would say, who told us that forgetting is essential for forgiveness to take place? I would challenge the notions, because we've all grown up, we've all heard forgive and forget, forgive and forget, forgive and forget. And the scripture says that God does that. God, says in Hebrews chapter 8:12, I will never again remember their sins. But last I checked, I'm not God. We're not God. That is that is unbelievable. So who told, where did we learn the fact that in order for forgiveness to be successful, that we have to forget the offense or the sin? And so I think there's a couple things that would be maybe helpful here, is that forgiveness is not rolling over and opening yourself up to the same abuse or the same sin over and over and over and over. Because I think a lot of people, we all have issues we wrestle with, and we bring all of those issues into our relationships.
Yeah.
And the people we hurt the most are the relationships that are the closest to us, those that were married, our children, things like that. And so let's just take marriage, because it's probably a great example. And for those of you that aren't married, just think about the people that are the closest to you, a relationship you've had for a very, 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 very long time. We typically repeat patterns of unhealthy behavior that we are still working through. And those can hurt relationships. And the people that we hurt,
wow,
we need to experience the forgiveness from them. But that doesn't mean that they don't say, hey, can we talk about this? How can we move past this? How can we have a relationship that's healthy? I don't want to keep experiencing this. And it's not to say that, like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to forgive you if you keep on repeating this. It is to say that that we also don't hold people accountable to their unhealthy patterns of behavior, or even sin. And so it's a dance. It's not. It can be very difficult to navigate those kinds of realities in the context of relationships, for sure. But I would say to summarize that point is that just because we remember if someone sinned against us doesn't mean we haven't forgiven them. Just because we still feel that sting, that hurt, it doesn't mean we haven't forgiven them.
Yeah.
Now, I think it could mean that, and that's where we just really need to lean into the Spirit and just say, God, have I forgiven them?
Yeah.
And if not, help me,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You said yesterday, forgiveness is given when we show our offender that we don't intend to exploit their sin. And you kind of got at this a minute ago. But I mean, you mentioned this a minute ago, but so often I think the heartbeat that I have found myself having is, I'll forgive you even though you didn't ask for it, right? There's this almost twisted, like, and especially in the church, this has happened since I've become a Christian that I have felt this way. It can become like forgiving can become, it can become like a superiority thing, or there's a way to forgive that is almost disingenuous, that comes off a little bit holier than thou, right? So what does it look like to forgive somebody for, like, in a conversation, you and me are talking, I'm forgiving you for something, and I'm coming at it in a way that communicates to you, I'm not looking to exploit your sin. I'm not looking to exploit even just the offense, whatever it was. How do we approach people in a difficult conversation, forgiving that person and making it really clear, I'm not looking to exploit this? Like, do we just have to say that? Or do we communicate that in our body language, or is it a mix? Or
I think it can be multiple different thing, but keep in mind that the passage that we're in, Genesis 45, Joseph never said, hey guys, I forgave you long ago. Or, hey guys, if you will ask for my forgiveness now, I'd be glad to extend that.
Yeah.
He clearly had already processed forgiveness. So he never said anything about forgiving them. He just said, everybody but my brothers, out of the room. Everybody out. Because he knew what was about to take place. He knew that he was going to reveal himself. He knew that they were going to go, uh-oh.
Yeah.
This guy had the power to take their heads.
Yeah.
He had the power to put them in prison and leave them there for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And so what he didn't want is to elicit fear or shame, unnecessary shame on their part. So he said, everybody out of, except for my brothers, everybody out of the room.
Yeah.
And so I think when we're forgiving other people, and let's just assume for a moment that the other party is remorseful. They feel bad. They feel horrible about what they said, what they did, whatever. Then we're not pouring salt in that wound.
Yeah.
We're not bringing it up over and over and over. We're not rubbing it in. When we see somebody in public that's that kind of thing has gone, we don't play this I'm superior card with them. And I think it can be body language. I think it could be a lot of things. It could be our eye contact. It could be a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking of Jesus saying, forgive as you've been forgiven. So I wonder if, I was thinking about the practicalities. Like, tell me how to come off as like in a genuine, kind, forgiving way. But maybe that stuff will work itself out if our heart is in the right place and we're realizing, man, God has forgiven me. He's been kind with me. He hasn't held that over my head. He keeps no record of my wrongdoing. I want to be like him in the way I forgive. And if that's our
Yeah.
heartbeat, I wonder if our body language and our words, and that's a lot of that stuff would take care of itself because our heart's in the right spot, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people that feel bad, they feel remorseful. There's a natural expectation that to expect the worst, to expect, oh my gosh, I deserve what I have coming to me, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And when they don't get that,
Yeah.
it is shockingly like God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when they experience gentleness and kindness instead of wrath and shame, I think it opens up my heart and their heart both
Yeah.
to the work of the Spirit in that moment. And it
Yeah.
that moment is transcendent across time. It shows us a lot about God.
Mm. Yeah.
It teaches us a great deal.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's so good. Okay, forgiveness. This was your second point here. Forgiveness is given when grace is extended. I've always thought of forgiveness and grace as exactly the same thing, but you were kind of talking about grace um, in terms of proximity, like allowing people to get close to you. At least that's what I heard you say. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, it's kind of what we just were talking about, I think. It's so it's one thing to forgive. It's another thing for people to experience grace in the sense of proximity and presence.
Mm.
So for example, many years ago at a different church I was a part of, we there was a guy applying for a role at the church, and he had a sin in his past that, just because of the nature of the sin, and it wasn't like, well, his girlfriend got pregnant. Okay, that's what it was. His girlfriend got pregnant, and so the pastor came to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about hiring so and so for this role?" And because they have this thing in their past, and I mean, again, this was like 25 years ago, so this was a while ago in the church, and I just remember saying, I just remember saying this phrase. I said, I think it's time that the church takes grace off of the shelf of doctrine and into real life.
Mm.
And not that I've got this right every time, but my point is that grace is really not grace until it's exercised in relationship.
Mm.
And so
Wow.
I can forgive you from a distance. Absolutely. We don't even have to have a conversation. I can forgive you. I can't extend grace to you from a distance.
Wow.
It doesn't work that way. It requires proximity, and that it could be a phone call. It could be me and you in the same room, but it requires some level of interaction.
Wow.
So when Adam and Eve, they'd messed up in Eden, and they were hiding from God. God could have just forgiven them, but he sought after them.
Mm-hmm.
He ran, he was looking for them. Now they expected the wrath of God. They were hiding. They were fearful. They were full of shame, but they experienced the gracious character of God.
Yeah.
And so we again, it kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier, but that when we give people what they don't expect, and instead extend kindness and graciousness and gentleness and all of these kind of attributes of what it means to extend grace, it brings all of us closer to God.
Wow. Wow.
So, it teaches us a lot about the character of God.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think when we parent this way, when we raise our kids to, that when they mess up, um, we can reserve discipline for a time after that they are assured and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they didn't lose our love.
Mm. Wow.
And so, I think, yeah, man, we could talk a lot about this subject, but I don't want to go too terribly long. But
Yeah. That's so good. Thank you. Really helpful. Okay. Uh, you had one more point. It was fantastic, but I want to jump into a message or to a question that we got in regards to the message that you haven't seen yet. You haven't heard yet, but it's a good one. So, initial response to this question. Hebrews 9:22 in the NIV says, in fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. So, what's the deal / significance with blood and forgiveness? There are about 7 verses from my count where Jesus says your sins are forgiven. Where was the shedding of blood in the forgiveness of those people's sins when Jesus forgave them? So, to sum that question up, how did Jesus forgive people before he died on the cross? If the shedding of blood is required for forgiveness, and what does that mean for us? First of all, what's the deal with blood and forgiveness, and what does that mean for you and me if we're forgiving one another?
Yeah, well, great question. First of all, I think the Hebrews passage is really in reference to our standing with God and not your standing with me.
Mm.
And so or my standing with you, although we take our cues from how does God love? That's the way we should love. How does God forgive? That's the way we should forgive. All those kinds of things.
Wow.
But regarding the shedding of blood, you don't need to shed any blood for me to forgive you.
Yeah.
I think that's a given. We all kind of understand that. So, first of all, when Jesus says your sins are forgiven, he is the Son of God, the eternal Son of God in the flesh. So he is our high priest. Hebrews itself said that he didn't become our high priest at a certain point in time. He was always our high priest. And so as God / human, but the God part of him, the divinity side of him, he had every right to pronounce forgiveness.
Yeah.
In the same way that somebody under the old covenant would have experienced forgiveness as well.
Wow.
The shedding of animal blood was only a foreshadow of the Lamb of God laying down his life and ultimately shedding his blood for the forgiveness of all humanity, past, present, and future.
Yeah. And
so either Jesus has that in mind when he's pronouncing the forgiveness of sin, like I'm God, I can do this, and then B, I know I can do it because I'm going to go to the cross and shed my blood for the sin of that person that I just pronounced forgiven. And the Hebrew passage that you read is ultimately what Jesus had in mind. He knew he knew why he had come. He knew what he was going to do. And so, yeah,
that's a really good first response. I've had time to think about it, but when I was just staring at my screen like, dude, that's a really good question.
It's a fantastic question. Fantastic question.
Nice job on the fly. I would have had to pause the recording.
Yeah.
on it and then come back to it. Yeah, I was.
Well, I mean, one could dive into that question alone and just spend hours and hours and hours and read tons of books on it. And I would encourage whoever, anyone listening, man, read Hebrews. Just read Hebrews. If you're at all interested in this idea of the old covenant and the new covenant, not coming together, but like the new covenant, fulfilling, Jesus being the fulfillment of the law.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I was thinking shedding of blood. Jesus didn't just if shedding of blood meant just literally shedding of blood, Jesus could have cut his finger for us, right? So shedding of blood implies death, first of all.
Yes.
A death has to take place. And I think you're right. In like between you and me, that has never old covenant or new covenant necessarily been the case. We have something between us we need to figure out, but ultimately whatever sin happened, first and foremost happened between one of us and God. And that sin has to be taken care of through the shedding of blood, through a death, which would happen in the temple with an animal sacrifice. As you said, foreshadowing the ultimate sacrifice found in Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, why Jesus had to die, and there was that foreshadowing in the first place. Like you said, you could read a lot of books on that, and there's a lot of people smarter than me who have said a lot about that and have disagreements about that. But really good question. You said at the end you want to give a quick resource.
Yes. Okay. So if you can fast forward, I'm gonna read just a couple verses from Genesis 50. So the heading on this passage is Jesus reassures his brothers. So Genesis 50,
Joseph,
verse 19,
Jesus, right?
What's that?
Joseph, not Jesus, right?
Oh, did I say Jesus?
Yeah.
Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph.
Joseph reassures his brothers. Yes. Yeah. Genesis 50:19. But Joseph replied, "Don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. He brought me into this position so I could save the lives of many people.
Wow.
No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children." So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. Now, unbelievable. And basically Joseph is, he's a type of Christ to come in the Old Testament. But there is a book written by R.T. Kendall. I'm not sure if you can see this title on there or not, but it is God Meant It for Good. The subtitle is A Fresh Look at the Life of Joseph. And Mason, I'm going to send you a link to this book. I would appreciate, just put it in the description below, and people can order this book. It is so powerful as he journeys the life of Joseph. But the whole point of the book is, how do we forgive? On this journey, how do we forgive? Because Joseph, this is right before he died. In verse 22, it goes on to talk about him. He's going to die. And man, don't we all want to be the kind of people in our elderly age where we're tender, we're kind, we're at peace, we're not bitter, we're not cranky? Don't we want to be the kind of people like, you know what? Life hasn't always been good. And you hurt me and that person hurt me, but you know what? God has worked it all together for good. God has seen that I'm still here and I'm about ready to be with him forever. But man, life has been good. Not every moment's been good, but life has been good. So anyway, powerful resource. I just encourage people to pick it up. It's not that long. It's great.
Shoot that link over to me right now. I'll put it in the description.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Pastor Scott, for your time. And man, like I said, I was just taking notes myself today. It's so helpful. This the subject of forgiveness is something that every single one of us deals with really on like a daily basis if we're living life in community. You don't have to be married. It's just if you're living life as the family of God with other people and you're sharing your stuff and your like your physical stuff and also the stuff going on inside your heart, and you're having hard conversations and you're eating meals together. This is something that's happening all the time. So man, I'm especially taking away the distinguishing between forgiveness and reconciliation, and hoping those things often go together in tandem. But the fact that they don't have to is freeing, not like a get out of jail free card way, but like I don't have to carry a burden if somebody else is not giving me the option to reconcile. I get to forgive. Oh, so good. So, thank you again. If you're tuning in, watching, subscribe to this video, and tune in next week Andre's preaching this week.
That's
So,
right.
we'll have to get him. He'll be on next week. That's going to be a lot of fun. Guarantee it. So thank you again for joining. We love you.
Mason, thanks so much for moderating. Appreciate you, and happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All right. Love you all.